Lord of the Rings.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the Season 2 finale of The Rings of Power. Middle-earth is starting to resemble the world that we know from the movies, with Sauron leading the orcs, the Balrog nearly unleashed, and Eregion leveled to the ground. We have a lot to cover, so let's break this baby down. But first, I want to let you guys know that we are going on tour. We'll be in 11 cities, starting in Boston on November 14th. We're going to have special guests, exclusive videos. It's going to be a great time. The links for that and our Discord are below. The first image of the episode is Durin, out of focus, emerging from an orange light at the end of a tunnel. Now, I appreciate how this is a companion to the final shot of this episode. This opening shot shows us a place that is covered in darkness, with a very small bit of hope, a literal light at the end of the tunnel, while the episode ends with the elves fully in the sunshine, optimistic about the future now that Sauron has finally been revealed to the light. So King Durin is mining, and notice how the very first shot we see is of the ring as it works this mining gear. So the symbolism here is clear. Durin isn't the one doing the digging, the ring is. Now, you probably remember from the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf said,
"The wealth of Moria was not in gold or jewels, but mithril."
Now, Gandalf goes on to say that the dwarves became greedy and dug too deep, which, eventually freed the Balrog. However, this episode stops just short of showing us this right now. Now, perhaps future generations will forget the story of the giant flame monster or think that it was all a myth, and then they'll get greedy and mine mithril. After all that mithril that made up Frodo's vest had to come from somewhere.
I never told him, but its worth was greater than the value of the Shire.
But then again, this show is condensing centuries worth of history into a few months, so we really don't know what's going to happen.
There are rules here? Oh no, there are no rules here.
I think it is possible that Durin's brother, who's hinted at the end of this episode, might show up and begin to mine for himself, unleashing the Balrog next season. So this storyline in Khazad-dûm has always been centered around this father-son relationship between the Durins. These men both care for each other, and it's tragic to see the ring and greed get in the way of their mutual affection. When Durin begs for his dad to take off the ring, all his dad can see is weakness.
A dwarf should never beg.
And then finally, when he breaks through, Durin starts to claim that they can actually use the ring to take the mountain for themselves. In other words, he sees the ring as a way to gain dominion over nature, which is exactly what Sauron wants to do with the One Ring, to use the ring to control and perfect nature, which is another way of saying to harness and destroy nature and shape it into something that resembles his own form. But as Durin says this, a slow flame begins to cover his face, and they see the true master of the mountain, the Balrog. Did you say what now? So the Balrog is another Maiar, just like Gandalf, Sauron, Saruman, all the other wizards. But like Sauron, the Balrog was corrupted by Morgoth, which then cloaked it in flame and shadow. In fact, that's the title of this episode, Shadow and Flame, taken from this line of Gandalf's.
You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dûm, shadow and flame.
Durin makes this last stand to distract the monster, and the explosion causes a cave-in, which keeps it trapped in the mithril vein, until next season.
Wait a minute, I thought King Durin had some kind of tomb or something in Fellowship of the Ring.
No, that's actually the tomb of Gimli's cousin Balin. He led an expedition of dwarves to reclaim Khazad-dûm before they were overrun by orcs. Now, I want to acknowledge that while we're talking about fictional disasters in Middle-earth, there is a real-world disaster happening right now in the United States, with the devastation and flooding following Hurricane Helene. And I'd like to let you know that there is a way that you can help people affected by this disaster. Our sponsor for this video is a digital service called Bono that makes it incredibly easy to donate to hurricane relief or to a number of other causes that you might support. So here's how it works. When you sign up, you're given a list of causes. Now, I initially chose embracing American veterans, empowering gender equality, and stopping animal suffering.
Why, thank you, person.
You're welcome. So when you sign up, you select your causes and then how much you want to donate per month. Like, donating to charities isn't just for billionaires. I started off with just $10 a month. It's very easy to do. But the amazing thing about Bono is you get sent this weekly impact report where you see exactly what your money helped to fund. I helped rescue 6 pigs from a research lab. I funded coding classes for little girls. And I helped to fund volunteers who are restoring the homes of veterans. There are just so many problems in the world. I always feel overwhelmed and I don't know how to begin to help people. But Bono makes this so easy. After you build your giving profile, you get weekly updates of your impact reports, and then they send you a single tax deduction receipt to keep your taxes simple whenever you file. And I know that my money is being put to good use. I can see the exact charities the money goes toward, and there is no service fee. 100% of your donation goes toward your causes, excluding third-party processing fees. And now I've switched my causes to Hurricane Helene medical and food relief. You can help donate as well by clicking our link in the description or scanning this QR code and using our code SCREEN5. Also, the first 50 people who use our link will receive $5 toward your first donation. I am so glad that I get to tell you about a service like Bono where we can do our part to help others with just a few clicks of a button. Again, to get started building your giving profile, click my link below and use my code to receive $5 toward your first donation. Thank you guys so much. Now, back to Rings of Power. Then we go back to Rune after taking a break for a couple of episodes. The Dark Wizard here is played by Kieran Hines, who also played Mance Rayder on Game of Thrones. He tells Gandalf,
5 of us there were.
So, just to explain some of the lore here, in Tolkien's text, Gandalf and 4 other wizards arrived in Middle-earth by ship during the Third Age. Now, this is the Second Age, so obviously they're making some changes for this show. Now, in addition to Gandalf, there was Saruman, Radagast, who we saw in the Hobbit movies, and 2 blue wizards. The 2 blue wizards went east to fight evil, and they were never heard from again. Their names were Alatar, or Darkness Slayer, and Palendo, or East Helper. But Tolkien never really fleshed out much about these 2 guys. He had the idea that they began some dark cults that practiced shadow magic, and the showrunners of this series ran with that idea. The Dark Wizard is another corrupted Maiar, one of the blue wizards who is seeking power for himself.
Like Saruman.
Exactly. Now, a few episodes ago, Tom Bombadil told the stranger that he had to choose.
Your friend or your destiny.
And here we see that he chose friends, going to save Nori, Poppy, and the Stores from the Dark Wizard.
Yeah, what's a store?
So there are 3 kinds of hobbits, the Harfoots, the Halifides, and the Stores. They all migrated from the east and ended up settling in the Shire. In fact, the Stores originally settled here, east of the Misty Mountains, before orcs drove them further west. And fun fact, the Stores were known to love water, rivers, fishing, seas, which we find out is because they came from a desert. So of course, they wanted to get near all the water that they could. In fact, Gollum, or Smeagol as he was called then, was a store, which is why he was fishing when he and his friend Deagle found the One Ring. Now, I'll be honest, I thought this whole sequence was kind of cheap and lame. The Dark Wizard offers Gandalf a devil's bargain.
We will both be his successors.
There's a couple heavies with knives to the hobbits' throats, and it's over in about 5 minutes. Now, it was cool to see this constellation that was directly above the Store homestead, which is why it appeared in Sadoc Barrow's book, and it's why the stranger was gravitating toward this spot. But ultimately, this whole storyline boiled down to Gandalf learning that friends are important and his staff finds him. That's a good enough story, but it was kind of an afterthought for the season.
Yeah, I mean, what was the whole point of this storyline, person?
Well, it's there to firmly establish Gandalf in Middle-earth, not just his name and his staff, but they wanted to actually define what truly guides Gandalf through the next few thousand years. The lesson that Tom Bombadil teaches him is that friends matter more than power. In other words, yes, you need power to fight evil, but you also need something to fight for. He finds a staff that's identical to the one that he uses in the Peter Jackson movies, and the store leader calls him Grand Elf.
Goodbye, Grand Elf.
Which later he shortens to his new name.
Gandalf. That's what they're going to call me, isn't it?
And actually, the way he phrases that is very similar to what he says here in The Two Towers.
Gandalf. That was what they used to call me.
Now, in The Two Towers, we learned that Gandalf was slayed by the Balrog, and then he returned to Valinor. But then he returns to Middle-earth from Valinor, and he's slowly remembering his old life that he lived in Middle-earth, which is why he says, "Oh, Gandalf, that's what they called me here." And this is very similar to the stranger in this episode, who is slowly piecing together, parts of his more heavenly identity. Now, Gandalf actually isn't even his true name. It's just one of the names that people in Middle-earth call him. In fact, Gandalf actually comes from the Norse word for staff, so it's very cool that when he finally finds the staff, that's when he discovers his identity and name. Anyways, Gandalf uses the Force to save the hobbits, and then the best character in the show decides to help the Stores go west. I really, really hope this isn't the last we see of Nori and Poppy. They're the most fun, relatable characters in this show. And I just want to thank all you guys for watching us all season long, and of course for shopping our merch store, where we have designed parody shirts like Hobbits Crossing Abbey Road, Gollum Swimming After the One Ring, and Pippin's Second Breakfast Diner.
What about second breakfast?
Shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel. Thank you guys for watching. The links are below. Back on Numenor, Pharazôn has decided that he doesn't care if the sea serpent chose to save Miriel. He's going to twist this sign from the Valar for his own ends.
We have learned why Miriel was able to bewitch the sea. It would seem she has an ally of cunning powers.
Sauron.
Remember, a few episodes ago, Pharazôn looked into the Palantir for himself, and he likely saw himself rising to power with the aid of Sauron. Now, in the book, Sauron is eventually taken prisoner by Numenor, and then he uses his sway to turn the Numenorians against the elves. And maybe that's still going to happen here. Or maybe Pharazôn's look into the Palantir was enough for him to declare martial law on all elf friends. Either way, I do expect him to get one of those 9 rings for mortal men, and that he will eventually become one of the Nazgul.
There were once men, great kings of men.
This would go against Tolkien's text, but again, they are making a lot of changes for this show and summarizing events that take place over thousands of years. So Pharazôn takes control of the government by blaming a religious minority and a small immigrant population of elves for all of the kingdom's problems, successfully ousting a female ruler who many believed was next in line for the throne. But in these divisive times, we can all agree on one thing. Eärien is an incredibly frustrating character. She runs off to warn her dad, one of the elf friends, that the government she has supported and propped up is now arresting elf friends. Now Elendil escapes, but first, ooh, this is really cool. Miriel gives him the sword, Narsil, the White Flame. Now this is the sword that was broken at the Battle of the Last Alliance, the sword that Isildur used to cut the ring from Sauron's finger. This is the sword that was reforged and used by Aragorn in Return of the King at the Battle of Mordor and the Battle of Gondor. And it looks almost exactly like it appears in the Peter Jackson movies. Now even though this show is made by different studios, they have directly lifted design elements from that trilogy of films. The Balrog, the Staff, Khazad-dûm, and all the elf cities. So they really want you to think of this series as a direct prequel to the Peter Jackson films. She tells him to claim his lordship. Now remember, Elendil has royal blood in his veins. This is one reason why in the future he becomes the first king of Arnor and Gondor. He rides away from the city, fulfilling the vision of himself that he saw in the Palantir, while Miriel is arrested by Pharazôn's forces. Now the show has this theme that the future is inevitable. Characters seem to think that the Palantir can show them possible outcomes, but characters are forever locked into a single fate, which makes sense because this has already been written down by J.R.R. Tolkien, and of course we know how it ends because we've read the books and seen the original films. The only time prophecy seems to stray is with the Stranger storyline, when he is told that he has to choose one path or the other.
Your friend or your destiny.
But this turns out to be a lesson to teach him that the real wizard magic is the friends we've made along the way. And then we get the Fall of Eregion, which opens with a gorgeous 80-second one-take shot. I mean, you can tell when they use CGI to cover up the cuts, but it's still a great capstone to the show's largest centerpiece, last episode's Siege of Eregion. And the whole thing ends with Galadriel getting captured.
Again?
Sauron is torturing Celebrimbor, trying to get the location of the 9 rings. When he talks about orc bloodlust, he mentions the elvish city of Gondolin, which fell in the First Age to Morgoth's forces. Now physically, Celebrimbor is covered in dirt and ash to show how Sauron's evil has overtaken him, but his eyes are still bright white and blue, showing that inside he is back to his old self, and he knows exactly how to insult Sauron.
Shadow of Morgoth!
Last episode, Sauron talked at length about how much he hated and resented his former master Morgoth, and how everything he does now is to prove that he is greater than him. He even takes Morgoth's crown to show that he can rule Middle-earth better than his old master.
For what he wished to destroy, I wished to perfect.
Celebrimbor tells him,
One alone shall prove your utter ruin!
Which is true. Sauron placed his entire essence into a single piece of jewelry. After it melted, he was destroyed. He goes on to say that Sauron is a prisoner of the rings and derisively calls him
Lord of the Rings.
He said it! He said it!
And this is also true. Sauron invests his entire essence into these rings. And you know guys, as Tyler Durden said,
Things you own end up owning you.
Afterwards, Sauron learns from his mistakes and sways the orcs to his side by finally using a little bit of respect and calling this one by their chosen name, an Uruk. Now back at the Númenórean colony, Isildur and Theo bond over their dead moms, and Estrad decides to leave her fiancé for him. But then Pharazôn's son Kemen shows up. Now remember, this guy killed Isildur's best friend just a few episodes ago, and then he announces that Númenor is now becoming a full empire. They're building fortresses on the mainland and demanding tributes from the common people to build a stronger military, and the colonists are now essentially slaves.
Any low man wishing to remain here will deliver a regular allotment of timber from the surrounding forests for the construction of His Majesty's Armada.
And as we saw earlier in the episode, the Ents are gonna have reprisals if the humans cut down too many many trees. Isildur is forced to abandon this woman that he loves now, and I cannot wait to see the look on Eärion's face when she realizes that her brother is alive. His death was the reason that she went off and betrayed her dad and everything she was raised to believe. So with him back on Numenor, does this mean that she will now join the faithful? Galadriel is taken to Adar, and she decides to once again forge an alliance with him. She will give him the rings if the elf and Uruk can put aside their differences for the greater good to defeat Sauron. And then she sees that after he put on her ring of power, Nenya, Morgoth's influence has been reduced and Adar has returned to his original elven form. So this transformation gives him
what alcoholics refer to as a moment of clarity.
But Adar's story has never been about wanting to revert back to being an elf. He has learned to embrace being an Uruk, and he has taught his people to be proud of who they are. Now, I'm glad they're actually addressing this issue of orc humanity in this show, because in the movies, we're just led to believe that all orcs are bad and they deserve genocide. But this show casts them as victims. First, victims of Morgoth's magic, and now victims of Sauron's manipulations. If Sauron hadn't stepped in here, it's likely that the elves and Uruks would have lived for centuries in peace in their separate realms. Instead, the orcs slay Adar in the same way they slayed Sauron in the opening of this season. We even see the same POV shot looking up at them from underneath. Sauron orders them,
Raise it, Egion.
which is why it no longer exists in the Third Age. Now, we know that Sauron wants the 9 rings, but when he sees Nenya, he is overcome with desire. So this reminded me of his former master, Morgoth, who coveted the Silmarils. Now, so the Silmarils were the most beautiful gems ever created. They have a really long story. It's in the Silmarillion. I'm not going to go to the whole thing right now. But the gems on these elven rings are actually the Silmarils that were created by the great elven smith Feanor. And just as Sauron fights for that gem, the orcs are taking down the statue of Feanor and burning all of Celebrimbor's records. So this will assure that nobody will ever be able to create rings of power to challenge the rings that Sauron has already made. Meanwhile, Sauron and Galadriel duel with Sauron using Morgoth's crown as a weapon. He repeats this line,
But to find the light, we must first touch the darkness.
which is what Galadriel's brother told her in the show's opening prologue.
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
Now, in the context of the show, this was about how Galadriel ended up having to meet Sauron face to face to finally let go of her quest for revenge and her hatred for him. During the fight, I loved this little wirework jump from Galadriel. I think that more fights with supernatural beings, be they elf or Jedi, should feature wirework like this. It's not CGI, it's practical, it's done in camera, and it looks so cool. Then Sauron continues to change forms, and as Celebrimbor, he says,
Are they not the seeds you planted?
and remember, Nenya gave Galadriel a vision of this moment a few episodes ago when Celebrimbor said,
Are they not the seeds you planted?
and this is all symbolic of how Galadriel brought Sauron to Numenor, and then the Southlands, and then to Celebrimbor. She enabled him to set his plan into motion. The reason he changes into Galadriel is because ultimately, she has to face herself here. She has to face her own guilt and culpability in Sauron's victories. But notice when he changes into the form of Halbrand, she softens a bit. I mean, I really think she had feelings for Halbrand. They two were definitely attracted to each other. Then he stabs her with Morgoth's crown. So there's a few things to unpack with this gesture. This is obviously like an evil blade that starts to send her into the shadows, like when the Nazgul stabbed Frodo on Round Top. In both cases, the hero's fall into shadow has to be healed with elvish magic. But also remember, there was romantic tension between Halbrand and Galadriel. They were attracted to each other.
Fighting at your side, if I could just hold on to that feeling.
I felt it too.
So this act, where he penetrates her, could be read as a metaphor for sexual assault. The way Sauron penetrates people's minds and emotionally manipulates them is a form of emotional abuse, which is far more sinister and long-lasting than just stabbing somebody with a sword. He says,
I would have placed a crown upon your head to worship the light of its queen.
And remember, in Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo offers her the One Ring, Galadriel says,
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn!
And this scene is laying the groundwork for that moment in Fellowship. She felt her ex-crush's presence inside the ring, reminding her of this old temptation. And then, just like in Tolkien's writing, the dwarves show up, but it's too late to salvage the city. Celebrimbor's Great Forge falls, and no one will ever forge rings of power again, except for just one more ring a little later on. Then Gil-galad, who, by the way, I haven't mentioned this, Gil-galad is played by Benjamin Walker, who was Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So Gil-galad uses his ring to heal her, but then Elrond has to use Nenya as well, which means that he has finally accepted that the Elven rings are beyond Sauron's influence. So as Nori gets ready to say goodbye to Gandalf, she gives a summary speech, just like the one that Sam gave at the end of the Two Towers.
Even darkness must pass. A new day will come.
which just gets me every single time, man. It's so good. But Sauron ends the episode with a promise.
And all anybody can do is try and build something new.
That something new is the One Ring, the ring that will bind all the other rings of power to him. Now, back in Khazad-dûm, Durin is now next in line for the throne, but we hear about other challenges he's going to face next season. The other dwarf lords offered Durin the third tribute in exchange for their own rings of power, and now Durin's going to be under pressure to deliver. Durin's brother also wants the throne, and we get this shot of everybody looking at the rings. And I wonder how long until the pressure gets to Durin and he slips on one of these rings for himself to face all of these challenges. Or is the next season going to be about his brother learning about the ring and then claiming it in order to seize the throne? Gandalf says goodbye to Nori and Poppy and then returns to Tom Bombadil, who admits that the whole friends or power thing was a test. And then he says,
"A wizard does not find his staff, it finds him."
And I think this is saying that the staff that is best for the wizard presents itself to him. Now, had Gandalf chosen power, as the Dark Wizard certainly did, then a staff like the Dark Wizard's might have found him. But instead, Gandalf chose friendship with the halflings, people who value life and growth and nature. And so the staff that he finds looks like the branch of a tree and not an ornate scepter like the staff of the Dark Wizard. The song they sing at the end takes lyrics from Tom Bombadil's song in Fellowship of the Ring and adds new lyrics, and it's all arranged by the incredible Bear McCreary, who has done some of his best music composition of his career for this series. And finally, the elves choose violence and vote to continue the War of Sauron and the elves. No spoilers for what happens in the books, but this is going to be one brutal war. I hope we don't have to wait 2 years for season 3, because who knows what cast members are going to stick around that long. So what did you guys think of this season? I thought it was much better than the first, but I'm looking forward to seeing a greater focus in the third season as they hone in on fewer characters, or at least match up characters who haven't worked together before. Like, it'd be fun to see Arondir Doran and Theo and Theo and anybody would be really fun. And guys, just a reminder to get tickets to our live show with our link below. Thank you so much for watching us all season. It's been a blast covering this show for you. And let me know what you thought down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.